white boys. Far better. We were magical. We were brilliant. And even though my mum didn't want a football way out because she wanted us to be a doctor or something, but the system would allow us to become doctors.
I was going to say that. Did you ever see yourself becoming a doctor? Did you think there's not a chance, I'm a black kid, I'm not going to become a doctor? No, it's not going to happen. They're not going to let me.
No, I didn't think we'd become... It was my mum and dad's dream, not ours. And they were living in cuckoo land because my dad and mum were not living in reality. My mum and dad were cleaners. And yes, I do understand you should have a dream for your children. But if you're in denial of racism, how can you dream about something if you're in denial of racism? And my mum and dad were in denial of racism. So if you're in denial, you telling your son he can be a doctor, I'm the one that's facing reality out there. I'm going out there and I'm seeing, well, how am I going to become a doctor if every minute I walk down the road, I'm either being chased by the police or chased by the National Front? What chance do I have? So it was a case of, we're locked out of the system. We're locked out of the education. What else could we have done? We had no choice. But today's young black kids are different. You don't have that same racism. You don't have the same situations. It's a lot better than what it was in our days. But when you listen to these young black kids and you speak to white kids who are growing up in this generation, they will tell you the same thing. They will say there's a class problem. They will tell you that. The blacks will still say there's a problem with colour because they still get stopped and searched for no reason. But if you speak to poor white kids in poor white neighbourhoods like Salford and those areas up north, Croxteth in Liverpool, Norris Green in Liverpool, you speak to white kids and they will tell you exactly what black kids are saying, except for in a class situation.
By the way, did you ever end up in jail, Sheldon?
No, I missed it by the skin of my teeth. I had 2 witnesses that came forward. So I beat up a police officer. But basically, I'm not saying that. Well, basically,
are you ashamed? By the way, are you ashamed of doing that? Do you look back at? I don't know the circumstance of the situation and why you beat up the police officer. But when you look back at that now, are you ashamed of that?
No.
Okay.
Because there's no way. Because they came on the bus. And basically, they were sitting at the back. Bus conductor asked me to pay the fare. I asked him how much. The police officer then stood up and said, speak English. Because back then, most of us spoke with a Jamaican patois. And he said, speak English. I turned around and said, what that mean? And then he turned around and said, you know what that means, you black bastard. And that's what set me off. I then punched him. He punched me. And then, obviously, me and my friends, they jumped in. And we kicked him down the stairs because back then, in those days, we had the old buses. You didn't have these new buses. Yeah. So there was no door. So when we kicked him down the stairs, he then fell off the bus, but his foot got caught. And so the bus dragged him.
Oh, God.
Obviously, we jumped off the bus and started running, and then all hell broke loose.
Was he badly injured? I know that,
Yeah, well, they beat us up in the back of the van. They said if he dies, you're going to, obviously they were upset. The police were upset. They caught us running through Trafalgar Square. It was a nightmare.
I mean, I understand your anger and why you attacked him, and I understand that, okay? But still, people are going to say, you left a man who nearly died. Who could have died? I mean, surely in your own heart, you can look back now at the because you're a different person now. And I'm going to talk to you very briefly about that in a second because you talk to other gang members now and try to get them on the straight and narrow. But surely you can look back and think, I should have been the bigger person, and maybe walked away from that situation. I know you had a lot of anger. I get that.
It's not possible at 15. You can't expect a 15-year-old to process that. That doesn't make sense. 15. We've got adults now who can't process that. We've got adults now who are big men who can't even process violent thoughts. We're 15. How are you expecting a 15-year-old to process a thought that this man's called me a black bastard for he's saying I don't speak English? And remember, this is after incidents of my friends being set up, brutalized, beaten up, my brother being beaten up. But remember, all of this is inside of me. So it's not a case of don't get me wrong. I'm not simply saying we should do acts of violence today. Obviously, I'm a peaceful guy now. I'm a Christian. I believe in Jesus Christ. So I'm not a person that's advocating violence anymore. None of that stuff. But back then, no one can't say to me, oh, don't you feel sorry? Because back then, when my brother was nearly kicked to pieces and police officers were laughing, and my friends had been set up, I had been beaten up by police officers, Ed had been thrown, that's in your head. So when a man calls you a black bastard, in your head, it's like, you know what? I'm not having this. So that's how that came about. It's not like we started trouble. Any incident that I got arrested for, I've been arrested 38 times, and any incident that I was arrested for was provocation. Provocation.
Sheldon, I understand, and I'm listening to you. And I certainly don't envy your life, because you've had a tough life, and I absolutely appreciate that. But there were many black people in Britain at that time who didn't get involved in crime, who didn't get involved in gangs, who made a better life for themselves. Yes, they would have had to fight harder than a white person to get those same opportunities. And I understand how that kind of racism, which was endemic at the time, was so difficult for black families coming to Britain. But many of them didn't get into trouble. So you can't,
You're right.
you can't say it happened to everybody or everybody reacted the same way.
No, I agree with you. In fact, I would say more than a majority of the black community didn't get involved. But this is where people need to understand. They didn't get involved. They tried, and you're right. But here's the damage. They didn't do well in school because they couldn't, because of the racist teachers. They didn't get good jobs. They were cleaners. We were at the bottom of the pile, and they had to eat humble pie every day, be insulted by their supervisors who would call them every name. Oi, monkey, come here, in their jobs. I was not prepared to go into a job and be called a monkey by my supervisor. No. So, yes, when somebody says to me, oh, yeah, but many black people, that's because they wanted to eat humble pie and put up with abuse. And I am sorry, but as a young black kid, 16, 17, going 18 in them days, I was not prepared to put up with those insults that many of our generation people did put up with, being called a monkey. My brother worked for BT. BT. He was insulted every single day of his life while he was there, to the point where he had to be sectioned. Don't tell me about success. There was no success. We had to live and endure what the people in South Africa had to live and endure in the 70s, in the 60s, the 70s, and the 80s, and the 90s. And things only began to change when we began to challenge in a forceful way about the system, and it still hasn't changed enough. So,
okay.
When people
by the way, I'm sure people listen have a complete understanding of what you went through, because we all know about, of course, what happened with apartheid back in the 70s in South Africa and how black people were treated. And it's horrible to think that people would treat other human beings like that just because of the colour of their skin. In relation, just because I've very little time, because it's been a really interesting conversation, I'd love to have more time to talk to you because it's a really interesting conversation. But you obviously made bad into good because you wanted to help other people, of course, and that's where Gangs Line comes in. It's a mentoring program. Just explain to me a bit, so what you do now.
So basically, because of a man called Jesse Jackson, Bernie Grant, when I got shot at and the guy got his head blown off, I got taken to America by Bernie Grant and Diane Abbott, who were part of a new political...
I'm aware of Diane Abbott, I'm aware of Diane Abbott, yeah.
And so they took us to America, and I stayed with Jesse Jackson. Jesse Jackson is former... Yeah, it's quite well known. He used to march with Martin Luther King. And one day, Jesse Jackson said to me, there's certain things you can do in life. One of them is that you can allow racism to dictate your life, or you can be angry all your life, do what you're doing, get involved in gangs, do all of that stuff, and then end up dead or go to jail. Or you can get yourself re-educated, get with God, and not allow racism to dictate your life, but you dictate to racism that you're going to be a difference. And I chose the second option, which is I wanted to be a difference, because I realized that I allowed racism to ruin my life in my early years. And Jesse Jackson said, we don't have to let it ruin our life. And who better than Jesse Jackson, Diane Abbott and Bernie Grant to actually say these words to me, because they were living proof that you can be successful and black and still believe in what you believe without going down the path of criminality. So that's how we became gang friends. So when I came back to England, I started to engage with gang members. In fact, I think to this day, I've engaged more gang members than every police force in the whole UK, engaged more gang members than any politician, than any school, than anybody in this country. I think about 15,000 individual gang members I've engaged with.
So what happens is they let them out on license into the communities, provided they're on this Gangs Line mentoring program. So essentially you're babysitting them and keeping an eye on them to keep them out of trouble.
No. It's not like that. Basically, no. It's a program the program we've developed has been based on myself and a lot of the people that work for me, which is the mind. We realize that how it works, how we're so vulnerable, is because we've not processed the anger that is inside of us. So I'm teaching young men and women who are ex-prisoners, former gang members or gang members, or who are still in gangs, some of them, to process the anger. Because what I've found, I've realized that this generation and the last generation are suffering the same sort of racism, but not in the same way, and the same sort of classism. But now it's added with dysfunctional parents. So with dysfunctional parents, the probability of a child being successful is limited. So my program is a psychological, cognitive program.
Okay. Well, I have to say, it's been a really interesting conversation. I love this part of the night because I get to talk to people who have no idea what their life is like. I have a wonderful idea of what your life is like now, but it wasn't a wonderful life. And I can completely understand the anger you've had as a young child and how that would, I suppose, demonstrate itself throughout your life. So I do have a great understanding. A lot of people have different views of it, of course. And I'm glad you turned your life around, by the way. And I'm glad you're now putting that to good use and helping other people to get through that difficult time in their life. And hopefully, by the way, the world is changing somewhat, particularly in Great Britain, although we are seeing problems at the moment, obviously, in relation to immigration, both in Great Britain here and here in Ireland. And I think what happens is when you see problems, political problems, in dealing with immigration, it starts to divide people. And that's very unfortunate. Anyway, it's been wonderful talking to you, Sheldon. Thank you very much indeed for joining us, and thank you for sharing your story. I think it's really important for people to listen to. Thank you very much.
Thank you. There
you go. That's Sheldon Thomas. What an interesting, intriguing, and horrendous story of a childhood. I can't imagine what it would be like to grow up in that situation. And I can understand what he was talking about, and the anger and why he formed his gang and everything else. I completely do understand it. Anyway, so many people texting in, by the way, saying how interesting that is. And it is interesting to get an opportunity to listen to it from that side, because you don't normally hear it from that side. You hear it from the other side about, somebody telling you all about these bad kids who grew up in gangs and they were bad kids, etc., etc. We don't normally find out why they were bad kids. Anyway, we'll be back again with you tomorrow night, same time, 9 o'clock. Lisa.
This is Bo, Luke, and Duke signing off, and Uncle Jesse and Daisy and fucking Boss Hogg and Roscoe P. Coltrane. We caught those guys in the Rolls Royce anyway. Phil Mitchell and Derek Branning and Max Branning and Barry Grant. We caught them. They're in jail. Okay, over and out.